Hi everybody, this is Mr. Farmer, and this is part 3, and I think going to be the final one when we're talking about the chain reaction worksheet. In parts 1 and 2, I went through all of these things. You can look for that. So today we're going to quickly, because there's some redundancy here, go through these. So on the part 1, I did an expansionary gap. So for this, we'll practice a recessionary gap to kind of start us off. And then we'll talk about fiscal and monetary policies and their connections. Again, a lot of carryover, so we're going to go a little bit quicker than we did for the first 1 and 2. So first off, expansionary gap, here we go. Let me get that ready. Okay, here we go. Let's actually do this. Okay, so talking about expansionary, recessionary gaps, so we're talking about in a contractionary gap for this time. So we got the price level, got the real GDP, we have the LRAS, which again is going to be our potential output. If we have a contractionary gap, that means our full employment is that we are below full employment, which means somewhere over here is where our output needs to be. Okay, somewhere along those lines. So here's going to be our aggregate demand, because it's downward sloping. Aggregate supply is going to be about right there. So you can see our actual minus potential equals the gap, and these are the real GDPs. When we say gaps, this is what we're talking about. I really didn't talk about it the first time. And so we have a negative gap because our actual right here is less than our potential over here, so we call that a negative or a contractionary gap. So that's what we're talking about. So as far as fiscal policies, what would you do? Well, again, we talk about what those might be, and so we're just going to kind of say, if you're trying to resolve a contractionary gap, what are you going to do? You're going to do expansionary policies. Now, when my students say that, I ask them the next logical question, which is, what do you mean by expansionary fiscal policies? What we mean is that the government's going to spend some more money, or they're going to cut the tax rates. That's what they can do. There you go. Okay. So, how would these impact... How would these expansionary policies impact the ASAD? How would that impact that? I'm actually going to go ahead and just reuse this over. Actually, no, I'll draw it again. Okay. So presumably, we are below full employment. Again, drawing a quick version right here. And with the benefit of the expansionary, we are going to go to right here. Now, you notice I like to make sure it's very obvious I'm right there, so I always just start from this point and go down and up. That way, there's no question I am now at the full employment mark. So that's the AD1. Now it's because of the fiscal policies. And then, yes, definitely do all of your labeling. We should always be labeling everything, and I'm going to be a good teacher and actually do that also. Okay, so we got our labeling. Now, how would this fiscal policy, expansionary policies, affect the loanable funds? Again, we talked about this. When the government spend money, they have to borrow money. So this is saying that the increase in government spending, that means that there's an increase in borrowed money from the Federal Reserve, or the government's borrowing more money. So we have the loanable funds graph. It's going to be real interest rates. That's what we use for College Board. Demand, supply. And we talked about this last time, that the government, they can borrow money, they can use money, they can demand money. They can't print it though. So there's an increase in government spend. That means there's an increase in borrowing, which means there's an increase in the use and demand of that. So we just draw a rightward shift, an increase in the demand of loanable funds. So that increases. All right, so how would that increase in loanable funds affect the ASAD graph? Well, if it's more expensive to borrow money, and again, I'm going quick, so if you need to slow down, pause, go ahead and do that. I am going pretty quick through this. So we have an increase in the real interest rates. That was found over here in this loanable funds graph over here. So based off this, households, businesses, these are going to be our main two people. Government spending, net exports. Note, we've already talked about government spending, so we don't double up and say it's happened again. The increase in government spending from 2 boxes ago, that caused this to happen, okay? Well, because it's more expensive, businesses and households, they're going to decrease the amount of borrowed money they're going to do. It's just more expensive to borrow money. So what impact would that have be on the ASAD? I'm not going to do the LRAS. That's kind of outside the focus of this. So because they're borrowing less money, there's going to be a decrease in the aggregate demand. Now, this concept we're talking about is called the crowding out effect, if you want to look that up. There's a ton of stuff on that. So that's a crowding out effect. So the increase in government spending, which should have increased over here, the actual impact might be, instead of increase the aggregate demand down the bottom left of your screen over here, right here, instead of increasing it, how impactful are these fiscal policies? Well, because of this crowding out effect, it might not be as impactful as we'd anticipate. Now, we have the decrease in the price level. How would that impact the Forex market? We've not done this one yet, so I'm going to spend some time on this. So, let's say we have 2 countries, U.S., because I'm in U.S., and country X, sure. So, right now, they have a trade agreement. They trade back and forth, imports, exports, great. Then something happened. What happened in the previous slide? The price level in the United States decreased. Okay. Decreased. So, what's that mean? It means that overall, man, U.S. goods and services, for that matter, they're cheaper. And over here, we're going to have country X going like, hey, these things are cheaper. I want more of those goods. So how do we do that? Now I'm going to kind of zoom around for a second. I keep doing that. We talked about this. Where are we talking about this? We talked about this over here. Okay. The idea is that, well, if I want to buy more of something, this was investments, this is a different concept, but if I want to buy more of something, I need their currency in order to do this. Okay, so let me kind of zoom back around to about here. So you got the United States, and they have their goods, and over here you have country X, and up here we have the Forex market. Now the U.S., country X, they want more of the U.S. goods and services. In order to pay for that, they need the U.S. dollar, because the United States, we're going to assume they're only going to accept U.S. dollar payment. But country X only has their own currency. So what do they have to do? They have to supply their currency, country X's currency, and they're going to demand, they're going to pull down the U.S. dollar, whatever else it is. So again, I've talked about this in part 2. This downward portion, that's going to be the demand for this market. And this is what we're going to be graphing down here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me zoom in for a second. Put a nice little line right there. Okay. So I did more in depth last time, so we're going to have country X per US dollar. Again, look at part 2 if you want a more in-depth explanation on this. So we got our supply and our demand. You can say E for exchange rate, and again, that's going to be X per US dollar, and this is typically 1 US dollar. How many units of X does it take, currency X does it take to buy 1 US dollar? And this is the quantity down here. Now, what did we say? We said that there is going to be an increase in demand for the US dollar. I could also do it in terms of X and say there's an increase in supply of X's currency. But because this says, or will say in a second, quantity of dollars, that means this whole graph is based on the demand and supply of the dollars. And that increased. Which means US dollar has appreciated. So the US dollar appreciates. How is that going to impact the Forex market? Well, again, I've also already talked about this in part 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. The idea is that if the US dollar appreciates, there we go. If the US dollar appreciates, it's going to be more expensive in order to buy it for that other country. Here I had US dollars and foreign currency. So if the US dollar appreciates, it is taking more to buy US goods than it used to. And now for the United States, it takes less money in order to buy that. So our exports are going to decrease because now we, in the United States, are more expensive. And we're going to import more because now, well, because of the exchange rates, it's cheaper. All right. What monetary policies would you use? And again, what we're talking about here are the limited reserves. So we're going to try and resolve this contractionary policy right here. Then we want to do expansionary monetary policies. That's going to be decrease the reserve requirement. This is going to be limited reserve. Again, there's also the ample reserve, and we'll find another video on that if you want. Okay, decrease the discount rate or buy open market operations. They'll be buying in some securities. And this is from the perspective of the Federal Reserve or the central bank. Just assume it says central because I know it does not. It looks like control. Let's just say it says central. Okay. So how are these open market operations, how is this expansion of the supply of money? That's the goal for limited, is to increase supply or change supply of money. How's that going to affect the loanable funds graph? So because of the monetary policies, we have an increase in the supply of money. So loanable funds, real interest rates, supply. So we have more money available. So what's that do? It increases the supply of money available to be loaned out. So if there's more of something, that generally makes it cheaper, and that's going to be true. We're going to have a decrease in the real interest rates. So based off of the change in the real interest rates, how that impact, let's go here, the ASAD. So we have the decrease in the real interest rates. How's that going to affect the ASAD? Well, if its real interest rates are cheaper, then kind of counter to before, households and businesses, they're going to borrow more money. Why? It's cheaper. There you go. That's it. Just don't overthink it too much. If it's cheaper money, then it's borrow it. Okay. So because of the decreased real interest rates, we have an increase in the aggregate demand because it's cheaper to borrow money. Now, how about if we went from the loanable funds to the Forex market? Well, again, in part 2, I talked about if the interest rates increase, that currency is going to appreciate. If an interest rate, like the real interest rate, if it goes down, that's going to depreciate the currency. Why? It's not as good of investment. Okay. Before I wanted to borrow money. Now I'm not going to want to. People are going to want to get loans from this country, but when I get a loan, I'm going to transfer it into my own domestic market. That kind of idea. And so since interest rates are decreased, there's going to be a decrease in the demand or an increase in supply. You could do it both ways of this currency. So we would do foreign currency per dollar. This is quantity of dollars down here. So because there is a decrease in the real interest rates, I could do this either way. I'd probably say an increase in the supply of money. And kind of quickly, the reason why, or the way I like to explain it, at least, I don't know if this is the best way, but I like to, is, again, I have the US and I have this other country foreign currency, and I have the Forex. So again, the United States had low real interest rates. What's that mean? The foreign country, they want to borrow money, but they have to borrow their foreign currency from the United States. So they can borrow some money. Why? It's a lower interest rate. Great. So how does this happen? Well, eventually I need to take whatever the money coming from the United States is, and I need to transfer it into this foreign currency. So this might happen on the United States side, it might happen on the foreign currency side, but either way, somewhere within this mix, US dollars are going to be sent to the Forex market to be transferred and exchanged for whatever the foreign currency is. Now, if this happens over here, or if it's this foreign country and they're sending the US dollars that they just borrowed, in exchange they're getting the currency that can actually be used domestically, doesn't really matter. The point is that at somewhere this is happening. So what's I mean? The Forex market has a larger supply of the US dollars. Hence why we draw the supply, which means the US dollar has thus depreciated. So finally, how does depreciated currency have an impact on the ASAD? Well, we are almost done. If you're still with me, congrats. C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports. Well, if the US dollar has now depreciated, then it's now cheaper to buy stuff from the United States, right? It used to be that one foreign currency could buy $1 US, and now $1 US can only buy something like, I don't know, a half, which means that same foreign currency can buy twice as much. So our exports are going to do something like they're going to double. And our imports will now we have to spend twice as much money to buy from this foreign country over here, so we're going to cut those in half for kind of a simplistic way to think about this. The rest, we're going to just remain kind of the same, just no change there. Okay. So based off this, if my exports are increasing and my imports are decreasing, my net outcome of net exports is increased. So that is going to increase our aggregate. Man, I've gotten lazy. Is this like a lot of graphs in there? Okay. All right. So there you have it. This is what we talked about. A lot of stuff. All right. Until next time. Bye.